Good evening.
Good evening, Brian.
Good evening.
Good evening, members. There is someone in the waiting room. Their name is showing up as Martha Kelly. Does anyone know
Yeah,
who that might be?
Yeah, that's Board of Ed member Martha Kelly.
Thank you.
Hey, Martha.
Hello, how are you?
What am I going to add to that?
Hi again. We're working with the volume controls in the council chambers. So, if somebody wants to say hello, just so we can see how it sounds in this room.
Ryan,
Hello?
you're coming through loud and clear here.
Thanks, Brian. You're coming through loud and clear here too.
Yeah, we're good here too. Who is in chambers? Is that
Looks like Ryan.
it is
Me and Jamie and Chief Mitchell actually just walked in, so there's 3 of us now.
Oh, very good.
Is there a way to zoom in on the council chambers, or does it always have to be on the distance?
Ryan, can we get a closer look at who's speaking if they're in the council chamber?
I'm posing the question to Jamie now.
I don't know what anybody else's experience, but when I came back to the house around 4 o'clock, Mansfield City Road was very slick. So,
I was back home. I was back home by 3 o'clock.
well, when I went out about 2 o'clock, it wasn't bad at all. I only out an hour or so, and the roads were really, there was real snow on the road, just enough to make it slippery and slushy. So it wasn't. I think I could have managed real heavy snow a lot more easily.
I have to agree, Mayor. I would have to say that at 3 o'clock, it was just starting to get a little slick in some spots.
Hello, Sam. Hello, Peter.
Yeah. Hey, Sam and Peter.
Hello. Madam Mayor,
Yes.
may I acknowledge a conflict of interest of myself before the start of the meeting once it's recorded?
When we start, if you have a conflict of interest, go right ahead.
Okay.
All right, it's 7 o'clock, and I'm going to call this special meeting of the Mansfield Town Council to order. This is March 9th, 2022.
Recording in progress.
I'll do it again. I'm going to call the March 9th special meeting of the Mansfield Town Council to order. This is a meeting that was requested by our 3 members of the council in accordance with our procedural rules to discuss our proposed spending of our ARPA funds. The public should know that there is, in addition, a public hearing scheduled on this topic on Monday the 14th. And everyone is invited to comment on our proposals. This is not something we are going to be deciding right away. We do have to make some decisions in the near future, but we have another year or so before we finalize everything. So this is going to be an ongoing project. No votes have been taken on the town council as of yet. We are still dealing with a series of proposals that are in front of us, proposed by the town manager. So it's definitely a work in progress. And I encourage members of the public who have opinions to submit them in writing or by email, or to attend our public hearing on the subject on the 14th, or in addition to make comments during public comment at all of our regular town council meetings. So the request for this meeting was filed by Mr. Coleman and Mr. Osberger and Mr. Frattoni. So I would, since this is your issue, I would, do we have members of the public who have comment, by the way, Mr. Aylesworth?
I have not been made aware of any public comments, but perhaps Tasha has heard from folks.
There were no public comments for tonight's special meeting.
Okay. So I just want to make it very clear that there will be plenty of opportunity for public comment on the whole package or on individual parts of it. And I would encourage people to tell us what they're thinking about this as we go forward. So the old business on the plan is the ARPA funding. So I will start with the town manager, but I believe Mr. Coleman has some issues he wants to bring up to us, and he also wants to state a conflict of interest. Mr. Coleman?
Yes, I'm on the board of directors of the Mansfield Downtown Partnership, and I'm going to recuse myself from any debate or discussion involving that funding, and I will turn off my video if it is discussed.
All right, there is nothing in this proposal that goes directly to the downtown partnership. I do not believe that you receive any money for your participation on the board. The Board of Ethics rules are that conflict of interest involves personal financial benefit. So I will accept your recusal if you wish to do so, but I do not believe it is legally necessary.
I do see on the item Mansfield Downtown Partnership, Business Relief Fund, Marketing Downtown, and Arts Relief Fund under the category of Mansfield Downtown Partnership.
The Arts Relief Fund and the Small Business Fund are neither one of them controlled by the Downtown Partnership. To some extent, because we have part of the executive director of the partnership also holds a responsibility to the town for development director. She has had some role. I would understand if you had a conflict of interest if you intended to apply for a small business grant or for an arts grant or something along those lines, but I do not believe that your membership on the board and on the council constitute a conflict of interest. So, my rule on this from other members of the council is if you're feeling uncomfortable, you recuse yourself. These issues are all about appearance and about moral rectitude, and if you feel you might benefit personally from some of these things, then it's entirely appropriate for you to recuse yourself.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's the choice I'm going to make. I'll recuse myself on any of that discussion tonight.
Okay. All right, Mr. Aylesworth, would you like to present the materials that we have on the agenda? There's go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will provide, I guess, a very truncated, abbreviated version of essentially the same presentation I provided the council at its last meeting, and which is largely the same presentation, pending any change of course tonight that I would anticipate presenting as part of the public hearing on Monday. So if you bear with me, I'll do a screen share. Hopefully everybody's seeing this screen now. Okay. I'll try to, so I can see the full screen. I'm going to minimize my Zoom video, so I apologize. I won't see anybody waving frantically at me while this is minimized. So you'll have to just use your audio to get my attention. So as a recap, and I know this is information that's been shared with the council multiple times, so I apologize for some of the redundancy, but the American Rescue Plan Act, $1.9 trillion funding package, was passed, I believe it was last spring, so it's coming up on a year, has been about a year. And that funding was multifaceted in nature. Some of it went to individuals, schools, businesses, and basically all areas of the economy that were suffering due to the COVID-19 pandemic. $350 billion of that $1.9 trillion was ultimately allocated to state and local and tribal governments to support recovery to the COVID-19 pandemic. And of that $350 billion nationally, Connecticut municipalities are slated to receive $2.55 billion, of which that is split between schools and general government. So $1.56 billion going to general government, so municipalities such as ourselves, and $995 million going to schools. Mansfield's allocation is a little over $7.5 million. The town will physically receive those funds by way of two tranches. You can think of them as deposits. We already received our first deposit, our first tranche. That was back in this past summer, $3.77 million. And we anticipate receiving our second tranche roughly 1 calendar year from the date of the first tranche. So our second tranche coming this coming summer. Eligible uses. Yes.
Mr. Aylesworth, if you read these slides, it's going to take us an hour to get through them. So can you just give us the headlines of the things that you are proposing to allocate money for?
The funding breaks down as follows amongst 4 different eligible use categories of funding. There are 3 categories that are roughly equal in allocation, and that's supporting public health response, replacing revenue loss, and water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And then our primary proposed area of funding focus is addressing negative economic impacts. And the sum total of these proposals add up to about $7.5 million. The breakout of the funding is detailed in the packet of information, several packets of information you guys have received in the last couple months. The most recent version, which is just a ever so slightly revised version of a previous version of the same summary, was emailed out to you in the last 24 or 48 hours and has been made available for public inspection as part of the public hearing on Monday. I'll stop there.
All right. Mr. Coleman, would you please tell us why you are requesting this special meeting for tonight?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I feel there's a great deal of work to be done, and I think we need to put the time into this work. It's very important work. We have a very heavy calendar, obviously, at the end of this month and all of April and the beginning of May for our budget season. So I felt it important that we keep going forward with this issue. There's so much detail that has to be pulled out of Ryan's proposals. And I would like to continue pulling the detail out and getting a better grip on, exactly how we're going to spend this money.
And what do you propose for tonight's session?
I would propose maybe line by line, having discussion line by line on the proposals, get a complete feel of how we're going to spend the money. There's a couple of issues that I've worked hard on that I'd like to bring up, but I would suggest going line by line to start. And at that point, I will recuse myself, with anything to do with the Mansfield Downtown Partnership.
I'm going to deny the request that we go through this line by line. This is a special meeting. We have a public hearing scheduled for Monday. Generally speaking, we do not make decisions on matters of such importance without a public hearing first. These issues have been available to the public, perhaps not as available as we would have wished, since the slides have not been as widely shared as we had hoped, but with this meeting and with the public hearing, they will be widely shared. So if you wish to address a particular issue, the floor is yours for that, but I don't want to start going through the whole thing.
Okay, Madam Mayor. I've done a great deal of work researching the Mansfield Middle School public water supply proposal, and I'd like to maybe share that with you today in a Word document. If I could share my screen.
No. What is in the Word document, please?
In the Word document is just some suggestions on correcting the problems at the Mansfield Middle School and my experience with the site visit.
Mr. Shaken.
Can I make a point of inquiry? And this may be a question for Kevin. And we've had this happen a couple times, and I want to make sure, since we're in this virtual format, that we are staying well in line with FOIA rules. In particular, the rules that things that are provided to the council in writing be made available to the public for review in one way or another. And so I just know from my work in my day job that with everyone trying to navigate the Freedom of Information Act with this new sort of virtual world, that it's been a tricky issue when people utilize the chat function in Zoom or ask to temporarily share their screen because the public hasn't had a chance to review the information that is being presented, or if that information is then not distributed to the public following its presentation, that they will not have had a chance to review it in any kind of detail. So I'm just curious if there's an opinion that Ryan or Kevin could provide in terms of how that particular sort of Zoom functionality comports with the Freedom of Information Act as it relates to our public meetings.
Mr. Janine, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. Thank you, Madam Mayor. This meeting, as all of our remote and hybrid meetings has been taped and is being, well, taped is probably an archaic term, but it's being recorded and will be available for the public. If there are documents that are shared, that ought to go, a hard copy that ought to be in maybe a belt and suspenders piece, but also ought to be filed with the town or the council clerk. So it's part of the, either the minutes or it is available for further reflection. But it's not a question of it having to be shown ahead of time, but as both part of the taping or the recording of the minutes of the meeting. And then it should be submitted to the council clerk so that it can be incorporated into the minutes if desired.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Shaken?
I think so. I have had several times over the last several meetings where my colleagues have talked about or shared information that I haven't seen or had a chance to even read prior to the speaking of that information, let alone review as part of the packet for the meeting. And so I'm happy to react to it in the moment, but it's difficult to provide thoughts and feedback without a chance to receive that information beforehand, as I do with the information that's in the packet. So in the past, when, well, I'll leave it there for now. If it's in compliance with FOIA rules, then we should proceed. I guess I would say in the past, occasionally, counselors in the minority would submit a memo to the council that would be included in our packet in communication if they felt that there was no other way to get that information in front of counselors and was in compliance with FOIA law. But again, it's just difficult to react to thoughts if they haven't been presented before the meeting.
All right, here's my suggestion for how we resolve this. We obviously have, since I knew that this was going to be one of the issues that Mr. Coleman was going to bring up, Mr. Aylesworth has invited our superintendent of schools, our facilities director, and there's a member of the Board of Ed here to talk about the middle school water issue in particular. So what I'm going to suggest, Mr. Coleman, is that you submit your Word document to us for consideration at our next meeting, but that we ask the relevant administrators and staff to explain this issue, because you aren't the only one who's had questions about why we're hearing this for the first time. We get some information about it, and then following the public hearing, you can continue the dialogue. Mr. Coleman.
Yes, I appreciate Mr. Shakin's and Mr. Denian's view. I provided the information to Ryan, and I did make a very late, and it was very late, email to Ryan with including the document. I realize it's late, but basically it is going to be debate and discussion, which is on the agenda tonight. I don't necessarily have to share the Word document. Can I discuss and debate what I'd like to say? Basically, that's what I'm doing.
Yes. Yes, but let's hear from the staff that one of the problems that I personally have had with this proposal is that we have not heard about this problem in the past. And I would like to know why it's justified that we do this. So let's get a report from the people who are recommending it, and then you can ask all the questions you want, you know, as long as everybody's willing to stay here and listen to them. So, Mr. Aylesworth, would you like to defend this addition?
Yes, Madam Mayor. So you've heard in my previous reports and presentations the sort of summary justification, if you will, for this project. It's a $2.75 million project. That's the total cost estimate. The proposal is to use $1.25 million of ARPA funds towards this project. The remainder of the project would be funded through other sources. We believe it would be highly competitive for new federal grant dollars that are being rolled out as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law that was recently enacted. The project scope has been expanded a little bit in recent weeks to include a roughly $250,000 component of the work to change out interior piping that we are concerned has lead solder in the joints and could therefore over time or with more time begin to leach lead into the water. That's not currently a problem, but it's one of those things that we've seen happen in other schools. I believe in perhaps two of our elementary schools that are a bit older than the middle school. We've seen this happen, and so it seems that this might be something that from a preventative medicine standpoint would make sense to do if we were looking forward to upgrade the water system. The summary I've provided in the past includes references to the fact that there have been positive coliform hits, and when that happens, the system needs to be treated, needs to be chlorinated to eliminate the presence of coliform bacteria, and concerns that have been raised about the ability for somebody without the best intentions to potentially tamper with a private water supply in a way that they wouldn't really be able to tamper with a public water supply. So that's the summary, but as you suggest, Madam Mayor, I think given that we have Superintendent Lyman and Alan Corson, our facilities director, and others here, I would defer to either Alan or Kelly to pick up where I'm leaving off.
All right, who would like to begin?
I'd be happy to give a high level reason why I think this has risen to the level it has for consideration. As Ryan stated, when we were looking at what to do with our elementary schools, one of our concerns was the water systems in the elementary schools. I know we're not talking about the elementary schools tonight, but the concern had to do with the pipes and the lead, among other things. And so as the middle school ages, and as we know that lead is used in some of those pipes, that certainly is a concern and something that we would expect to become an issue in the future. Schools are required to have their water tested regularly. There are many appropriate regulations around water quality in schools. It's a serious issue. And so the middle school water is tested regularly, and Ryan's correct. We have not at this point found lead, but given our experience at now 2 elementary schools, we wouldn't be surprised if that happens in the future. The other concern that we've had for some time is that the well does misfunction at times. And I'm not sure that's the right verb to use. Alan can correct me on that. But it is common, at least once a year, sometimes more, that we experience some sort of power outage that results in the well system failing to operate appropriately. As the water level in the well goes down, the risk of groundwater contamination increases. And again, following regulations, we are required to shut down use of the well so that the water can be tested, water levels can be brought back up, and then once safe, we can return to using the water. It just so happens that this happened 2 nights ago. And so we went into the school building on Tuesday morning, found low water pressure, realized that in the wind on Monday night, that the power had gone off. The well had gotten lower than it should have. And while we didn't lose water completely, immediately we have to call public health. Public health had to shut off the water. We have a building now with about 600 staff and students in it. Has to be serviced entirely by bottled water for not only drinking, but also hand washing. And so then we scramble to get water bubblers and hand washing stations in the building. We can't use the dishwasher even in the kitchen. And so we're reduced to using all throwaway products in our kitchen. And again, this is a regular occurrence. Why have you not heard about it? Well, because we know it's a really costly proposition to bring town water to the middle school. And it's something that Alan and I have talked about for some years. And given the opportunity that the ARP funding and some of the other grant programs that Ryan is considering presents, we thought it was a time to make you all aware of our concerns about this, so that perhaps we could at this time correct the issues and bring town water to the middle school.
Thank you. Mr. Corson, do you wish to add to this?
Sure. I also want everyone to understand why, I was looking at an improvement to the system, not that we can't manage the system and we can't fix problems with the system. Because in my time, I've been doing it for 21 years. We've been doing and fixing problems with the systems. This was just trying to look at how we could do something better for the school. And knowing that, you're potentially looking at a renovation of that school at some point, this was to set you up to bring in some public water. You have gas brought in there now. It'd bring in public water. Things like with the new school you just built, you had to put in a big storage tank for a sprinkler system. That's something you'll do on a well system, but you won't necessarily have to do that on a public water system. Also, security is definitely better with a public water system than a private system. We don't have the means to monitor like they do all the time. So it's another thing that just looking at the future of that. And Kelly's right. We did just deal with the problem. No matter, we have a generator set to come on, and the generator, we just had it rebuilt. We had a brand new transfer switch. The power tripped out with the storm we had the other day, and the transfer switch didn't transfer. So we basically woke up to no water at the middle school. So now for, my staff now will put, 20, 40 hours into bring in wash stations and, make sure the water gets tested and so on. Just another thing that happened too was 5, 6 years ago, I had an accident where I was the licensed water operator for the town. And the state requires you to have a water operator basically all the time for the system. I hurt myself and I was out for 3 months. That time the state came in and they cited us for not having an operator. So we hired Connecticut Water at that time to oversee our systems. So it's also helping in that aspect too, that to have that water operator. A company that provides water all the time has those people all the time. So that's it though.
Anybody else from the administration? Mr. Ellsworth? Okay, Mr. Coleman.
Yes, I just want to give you my full disclosure. For a good many years, I both drilled wells and installed water systems in Eastern Connecticut. So I do have a level of expertise. And I have a question for Kelly. If the power goes out, the pump is not running, obviously. And if the pump is not running, how does the level in the well go down if it's not being drawn upon?
Well, I'm afraid that's not a question for me. Alan?
Hi again. What happened was the level in the tanks were fine. It's just that the pumps that pump it into the school were not working. So actually when our maintenance guy first arrived there, he found that transfer switch didn't transfer. He got it to transfer, pumps were running, and we had water. But according to the state, the moment you lose pressure on the system, you then have to make sure you verify that your water is safe to drink. So then you go from, nobody can drink it. And we also have added in that we need to do separate hand washing with separate hand washing stations that we got to bring in, usually by renting those.
And it sounds like we have a transfer switch problem. Is that correct?
That's what happened in this particular case. And we do have Higgins Electric is the one who had installed that. They are already looking into making sure it works and looking at any repair that needs to be done on that.
So we just need a reliable generator and a transfer switch, and then we shouldn't have that problem anymore. Is that correct?
That's what we had was a reliable generator and a transfer switch, but it's only a 3-year-old transfer switch. By all means, it shouldn't have done what it did, but it did. So,
and I'll just add to that that's been my question every time this has happened. Where's the backup? Why isn't the backup working? And what I've come to understand is that anything electrical is highly volatile when there are significant storms. And you all know how the wind can whip through some of the hilly areas in town. And time and again, when this has happened, it's been because the backup system has failed to operate in the way it should. I don't think it's as simple as replacing the backup system because we've done that and still problems persist.
Well, I would think that there would be a way to have a more reliable system, especially for a school.
What I'm hearing is the way you have a more reliable system is you get on public water.
correct.
I think you could remediate and, upgrade the generators and the transfer switch to be reliable.
Well, again, I'll just repeat that that's been tried on more than one occasion. I wish that we hadn't had these problems. You know, we have other backup systems for other operations, and we've not experienced the problems that we have with the well.
Mr. Osberger?
So I'm just trying to understand all of this. I imagine that there are other school systems throughout the state that don't have access to public water and have to rely on these kinds of systems. And so they're pretty much bound to these kinds of systems and have no choice but to use these kinds of systems. So there has to be reliable systems out there, if not for what we already have in place. Secondarily, I would think that a closed system with its own wellheads and things would be much more secure than something from a public water supply that could be hacked or could be contaminated and then sent down the line. Secondarily to that, I imagine there's going to have to be booster stations that's going to have to send this from the distance where we're tapping from. And then if we lose power, well, so does that booster station.
Yeah, all I can tell you is that I've had home systems that are well. I've had home systems that are town water. I've never experienced the problems that we've experienced at the middle school. And I think your point about other schools that don't have an option are on wells, that's true, including our 3 elementary schools. But we do have an option at the middle school because town water is nearby. We also have an option at Goodwin School because town water is nearby. So to me, the town public system is a much more reliable system that has its own staff that's overseeing both its operation and its safety. And as Alan mentioned, not only every time this happens is it staff intensive, but there are staff hours that are needed to maintain the system and to inspect the system regularly. So, you know, I'll be honest, do you have to do this? No, we can deal with this. We've been dealing with it for a long time, but you have an opportunity here to do something. I don't know what competing projects are out there. So I don't know, how to offer my feelings about the priority of your projects. But I will tell you that this is a project that has been troublesome for us at the school for many years. And if there is an opportunity to do this without great cost to the community, it seems to me that you might want to take advantage of that.
Well, I'd say $1.25 million is quite a big cost for the community. You have to also take into consideration that you're going to run the water line down 195, then you're going to run the water line up Spring Hill Road, and every single person on that run is going to be assessed. And that's another consideration.
I don't think we assess for the water line. We assess for sewer line, but Connecticut Water.
Every single person on a water line will have to be assessed. Every single person. I have a friend that works for a water company. You will have to be assessed.
Mayor, can we ask this as a question rather than arguing about our friends and expertise? Does someone on the staff know the answer to this question?
I don't know if John Carrington knows as far as, public water supply and the law surrounding that, or Kevin for that matter knows. I can say that the proposal that's been set forth is not anticipating any assessments on users, but whether or not a system installed by a private utility, in this case Connecticut Water, if that runs in front of somebody's home, whether or not that utility has some legal means to compel, which is what I think Mr. Osberger is getting at, compel the person whose house it runs in front of, whether or not there is actually a mechanism to compel that. I guess that would be a question for either our attorney or Mr. Carrington.
Mr. Carrington is online. Mr. Carrington?
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I am not aware of anything that assesses a water line. I know when they put in the line at Four Corners, nobody was assessed, so I don't know if the town has to assess or can even assess. So I think that's a question for the attorney right now.
Okay, so let's put that question on hold. We don't have an answer to it. I don't think we are going to reach a decision tonight. So I think what I would like to hear from people is there contributions to the discussion? We don't need to worry about persuasion quite yet because we aren't scheduled to vote on anything yet. Ms. Berthelot, followed by Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Kelly and Alan, for being here and for answering these questions. They're super helpful. And I very much appreciate your concerns of being a mother of a daughter who's gone through the schools. Safety of water is super important. When you talk about lead, yikes. I know just that there was just a change in what's permissible in terms of lead, in terms of sort of measuring whether children are in danger. What is about an aging system that makes lead increasingly a risk?
Mr. Carson?
Yes, I would say mostly, I've been through the history of a lot of these systems, and mostly I think it's just over time, even though the water stays fairly neutral, there is a wee bit of corrosiveness to it, and I just think it wears at those fittings. For years, we've been fine at the other schools that we've now are experiencing problems, and it just starts to leach out of those fittings. Sometimes it's in the faucets that the packings that they put in have lead, and that starts to come out. We've done a lot to change out faucets, and for Vinton School that had the problem a few years ago, we replaced all the cold water lines in the one wing that had the problem.
And if I could ask a follow-up, would the public water system decrease the lead risk, or are these materials, are these problems internal to the school and we're going to have them?
You're going to have that one either way. We're going to have to tackle that either way. That's something that came out in our first discussion, as we were talking about. Again, middle school does not have or show that problem. Every year we check the water for that. We check at certain locations. It has not shown up yet. We're just saying that we've experienced it at other schools, almost the same vintage. So we're saying, it could show, hopefully it does not. And we'll do everything we can to mitigate it. So,
Ryan, didn't you also mention that the project includes replacing some pipes?
That's correct. The original overall project budget was estimated to be $2.5 million. As we started to discuss this proposal with the council and subsequent to Mr. Coleman's own site visit that he took part in, and we were talking about this very issue about concerns about the internal piping, and as Alan just said, having to address that regardless. The decision was made that if you're going to address one, you might as well address both at the same time. The only thing I want to be clear on is that the amount of funding that would be coming from Rescue Plan, from ARP, has not proposed any increase. So basically, whereas my original proposal was 1-for-1, 1.25 million from Rescue Plan and 1.25 from other sources, I'm confident that this project will be competitive with some of these other new grant programs that are being rolled out, that we will not need to increase our contribution from Rescue Plan in order to achieve the full $2.75 million budget.
Mr. Coleman, followed by Mr. Shaken, followed by Mr. Shuren.
I'm going to ask if I can share my screen. The document contains debate and deliberation as if I were to speak.
Mr. Shaken?
May I ask a substantive question first?
But I want a ruling on whether we can, go ahead, Mr. Coleman, share your screen and show us what you got. But I'm going to ask that you submit it to that it be included in the record for our next council meeting when we will be discussing this.
Ryan has a copy. I don't know, can you see it or not?
Nope, all we can see is open Zoom meetings.
Okay. Let's do a new share. Is that better?
Nope. Oh, here we go. Yep.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so the proposed public water system service is ARPA funding is 1.25 million, and of course, another 1.25 million in match funds brings it up to 2.5 million. I would like this request removed in its entirety, but the funding for the removal of the lead-based plumbing would be most acceptable. My professional findings support this.
Mr. Coleman, we can read the words. Can you summarize?
Yes, I can summarize. There's 11,000 gallons of storage on site. So there's plenty of quantity and there's fine quality. One well was contaminated with coliform bacteria. The only way that can happen is if the well casing is not set to the bedrock. If the drive through doesn't go into the bedrock, surface water can contaminate the well at that point. Okay, so there's several approaches to mitigating this problem of surface contaminants. Seal and grout the polluted well to seal off surface contamination. If production is adequate from the other two wells, abandon the polluted well. The old well will need to be cemented or sealed off. Abandon the polluted well and drill a new well. All right. The seal and grout option should be tried first because you're at risk of contaminating the other two wells right now, leaving it as it is. The pH is 7.44, will not corrode pipes, release metals into the drinking water supply. But I will note pH can change, and with lead plumbing in the school, it'd certainly be a good idea to have some funding to do that. There's not any main staining or fixtures to there's no staining to the fixtures of the toilets. There's no indication of heavy iron or anything like that. There isn't any odor of the water, and I tasted it, and it tasted fine. It doesn't have any heavy metal taste, odor, iron, or anything like that. As far as security concerns at the MS drinking water supply, there's some simple steps that we can take. We can install locking caps on all the wellheads, install locking enclosures around each wellhead, and install motion-activated security cameras. And I would recommend that at the new elementary school as well. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Mr. Shuren, followed by Mr. Shakin.
Yeah, I was just going to ask kind of peripheral question. This project involves funding from other sources in addition to ARPA. And I wonder if the project is contingent on receipt of those other funding sources. If those should not materialize.
As presented, I would say that's an accurate assessment. If the project were not to get other sources of funding, although, as I've said a couple times, I think it would be highly competitive for that, given that we're talking about water quality in a public school environment. But even if we allowed ourselves to say that is not a guarantee, it certainly isn't. We're talking about competitive grant funding. My view of this is that at that point, obviously, the council would be made aware that our applications to pursue additional funding have not been successful. And at that time, the council would have some decisions to make about what additional funding sources it may or may not want to turn to in order to fund the project. But if there was no desire to consider other alternatives at that point at the council level, you're correct. That funding that has been proposed to be programmed from the rescue plan would be available to fund other project services or priorities.
Thank you.
Mr. Shakin.
I have just a substantive question on this. There's been a lot of talk at the state and federal level about lead abatement in our schools, about infrastructure funding. Obviously, those are both allowable uses of the ARPA funding, but I'm curious if, and most of those conversations have started happening since, Ryan, this plan was put together. And so I'm curious if portions of this project would be eligible for those state or federal programs if they exist.
Yeah, I do believe that there's reason to believe they would be. And actually, since the way you just framed that question reminded me of a second point I wanted to make to Councilor Shuren's question, which is if we were able to get a larger than 50% cost support from these other competitive grant sources, then the amount of rescue plan funding for this project would also be able to go down. I think it's unlikely that a project of this nature would get higher than 80% support. Usually 80-20 is about as high as it would go. But in that event, we would be able to potentially fund the project at a much lesser level than the 1.25 million. It's sort of being proposed this way as a bit of a compromise. There's a high level of confidence that we'll get some level of funding, but proposing in this way allows the council to hedge a little bit, for lack of a better term.
Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that if we applied for funding under the infrastructure bill, that the money which we've received from ARPA can go toward the match.
That's correct. So we will have decisions to make when these grant programs, which again, they've only really been announced at a high level. They haven't actually become available yet, so they haven't announced any application windows or associated deadlines. So we're operating a little bit in the area of speculation, but you're absolutely correct. Whereas I think the interim federal rule that was published relative to the rescue plan said that rescue plan funds could not be used as non-federal match for federal grant funds. The final rule has since made it clear that you can. So yes, rescue plan funds that the town receives can be used to cover the town's portion of a match for other federal grant programs.
Mr. Shaken, are you finished with your question?
I don't have anything else about the water system at the middle school, no.
All right. Is there anything else about the water system at the middle school? Mr. Coleman, you've made your presentation. Is there something else you wish to add?
I think this is an unnecessary expenditure. That's all I have to add on my.
Got it.
Okay.
And thank you for your work, and thank you for what we have in front of us. You've raised some really serious issues. Mr. Shaken.
Thanks. I just have a sort of procedural question as to continuing with the sort of agenda item for this evening, the general discussion about the ARPA plan. And I appreciate the information about the middle school, and I think we did get some new information from staff tonight. But I have a just sort of a question maybe for the council at large, or for you, Mayor, that we had a discussion about our process in terms of consideration of these issues at our meeting last Monday. And there was some conversation on the council about whether we needed to deliberate and make decisions further prior to receiving the public's input on Brian's plan. And the council, there was some disagreement, but the council decided, unofficially at least, that at least the majority of us wished to receive public input and then proceed with our deliberations and come to some conclusions to inform the staff's plan that needs to be submitted to the Treasury, and also to get some of the money where there is agreement and that's ready, that's sort of quote unquote shovel ready, moving sooner rather than later. And so I haven't heard a motion yet this evening to make any changes to any plans. I would oppose one for the reason I just stated, but I'm just wondering if there isn't any new information that we haven't already received from the town staff about any of these different proposals, whether we ought to continue with our stated plan last Monday of soliciting public input next Monday at our regular meeting, and proceeding to then deliberate and make decisions following that public input, as we had discussed a week and a half ago.
All right, let me see if I understand your question. You're asking, have there external circumstances regarding any of the proposals changed in a way that the staff wishes to modify the proposal in front of us?
Yes, and if not, in the absence of propositions for the council to make modifications this evening, whether we ought to do as we decided a week and a half ago and wait for the public's input on the manager's plan before we continue debate, deliberation, and decision making on these funds.
Well, I have not heard a motion yet either. I will say that the council's position was that before any decisions were made, that we would hear from the public. And I am fairly certain that given Mr. Coleman's input for tonight, we might hear something from the public on the 14th. However, you know, public agencies are often criticized by the public for presenting done deals in public hearings. And I just want to make it very clear that none of this is a done deal. And my goal as mayor is to go to public hearing, receive public comment, and continue the discussion of what ought to be included and what ought to be funded from our ARPA funding. So in the absence of any other input, then I think that we should proceed to our Monday night public hearing. Mr. Osberger?
Well, I think part of the purpose of this meeting this evening was to get some clarification on some of the line items. There are a handful on here that I have questions on that just seem somewhat ambiguous and don't seem very clear.
Well, there are a number of items that haven't been fully fleshed out yet, and where we are waiting for additional information.
Right. I mean, some of them are just ambiguous language, and so it makes me wonder, for the dollars that are in those columns, what an other is and what a to be determined is. I think that when the public gets to see that, they're going to be a little nervous, I would say.
Well, that's the point of the public hearing. We hear from the public what they want us to fund or not to fund. Mr. Shaken.
Let me be more blunt and direct. This is a special meeting that is out of the ordinary for us to talk about one thing and ask substantive questions of staff. It's been almost an hour. We've covered one topic. And I would encourage my colleagues, if you got questions, ask them, because some of us have family matters to attend to and other business, busy work schedules, et cetera, that generally make it difficult to be pulled away from for special meetings. So I am trying to be open to colleagues needing more information from staff. And so my suggestion is, if you got questions, ask them. And then we proceed to the public hearing as the council discussed on Monday.
Mr. Coleman.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Shaken, I'm a colleague of yours, and I called this special meeting because I think there's a great deal of work. This is just debate and deliberation so we can get a handle on what we can discuss in Monday's meeting. That's all this meeting's about.
Okay. I don't hear any further questions. Mr. Osberger, I know you have some questions about the meaning of terminology. I would strongly suggest that you put them on paper, get them to the town manager so that the appropriate staff will be available to answer those questions. We have taken the time of a very large number of staff members this evening who had expected, like the rest of us, to have time away from work. So I would suggest that you put your questions on paper and let the staff have an opportunity to provide some answers. I have some questions as well. And if we raise those questions before Monday, we may be able to get a couple of clarifications. Mr. Coleman.
Yes, I provided some questions earlier in email in preparation of the last meeting, in preparation of this meeting, to the town manager, and haven't received a complete reply to it.
Well, we have requested that when questions are answered, that the answers go to everybody. Mr. Aylesworth has been very busy on a range of issues. I shouldn't speak for him, but I do know that it takes time to answer some of these things. So I'm sure Mr. Aylesworth will have the appropriate people online following our public hearing and when we have this further discussion on Monday.
I would just say that if there, and I'm happy to talk with Mr. Coleman about this after the meeting, if there's additional questions that staff has not answered yet, Perhaps I'm not aware of them, but certainly it's our every intent to provide information in as quickly a time frame as reasonable, and we will continue to do that.
All right, so I think that Mr. Osberger.
Ryan, did you have some time tomorrow that I could stop by the town hall and we can go over some of this stuff?
I will find time for us to perhaps. I'm already scheduled to meet with Mr. Coleman tomorrow morning. Perhaps we could make it a 2-for-1.
Okay. Okay.
10
I have
a.m.
time.
10
I have
a.m.
time. Yeah, I have time before noon.
All right, Mr. Shakin.
Well, if there's no other business for this evening, I was gonna try to sort of codify our process in a motion, but I'm happy to make the final motion if that's what sounds like
Yes.
people are rolling towards. Okay. I make a motion to adjourn, and uncharacteristically, I'd like to speak to it briefly.
All right, Ms. Berthelot seconds. Speak to your motion.
Just very briefly, I want to just assure everyone on the council, and including very much my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, that we all have lots of questions about the ARPA plan, and that we have sort of gone over this process repeatedly, I would say, as a council, where we have staff who have recognizing the detail of this plan and frankly the amount of money that it is. It's a lot of money. It's more money than we generally spend in one fell swoop, that they need some guidance from us after to really get into a very detailed assessment of particular pieces of the plan. And so that's, I think, what the next step is to provide. It's what we've talked about. But we talked a week and a half ago about the desire of the council to get public input about what the manager has proposed broadly so that we can make those decisions in a more informed way. And I think it's entirely appropriate. I continue to think it's entirely appropriate that we do. I'm not comfortable making any more decisions tonight without that input. And so I think we ought to adjourn.
Anybody else wish to speak to this motion? Mr. Osberger?
I just would like to respond to Ben's comments, and I do agree that I'm up to a point where I don't know that has anything to do with one side of the aisle or another, that this is more the people's money and we all are working together to deal with this on a non-political situation.
I agree. Mr. Coleman?
I can't support the motion to adjourn. We're all together, and I think there's a great deal of work to do yet.
Mr. Shakin for the second time?
Sure. I just will say, as a matter of process and procedure, our rules of procedure, which are adopted by the council every term, allow for any 3 members of the council to call a special meeting to discuss anything that they choose at any time that they choose. But I've been on the council for 6 years now, and I can't recall another time when 3 members have decided to call a special meeting. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I am saying that it's my opinion as one counselor is that it's important that the council function in such a way that people who have other obligations in life can find a way to serve. And that means people who have work schedules, who have family schedules. And part of making that possible, in addition to allowing for meetings to happen virtually and everything else that we do, is that to have counselors have a reasonable expectation of what their time and input to the council need to be. And frankly, out of fairness for staff, to make sure that staff have that same expectation of their time and input. So I appreciate that there's more work to do. We're going to do it, but I don't believe there's any more work to do tonight. And so for that reason, I support adjourning this meeting.
All right. Is there anybody who's going to vote in the negative about adjourning? Mr. Coleman votes in the negative. Is there anybody who wishes to abstain from this vote? All right. The motion has been adopted by 8-1, and we are now stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for setting aside this time and holding this discussion. Thank you, Mr. Coleman, for your input. And there is a lot more work to do. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Recording stopped.